This week, we will be looking at the poetry of Robert Frost. I would like to take the opportunity during this direct instruction to give you some background on Robert Frost and his life, and take a look at the first of the series of poems that you will be reading this week. So let's start with a brief biography of Robert Frost. He was born in San Francisco, California in 1874. At the age of 11, his father died, and without his father at home, his mother decided that she was going to move them across the country to Massachusetts in order for her to be able to support the family and be successful. Frost graduated from high school and briefly attended Dartmouth College, but he really did not enjoy time there, so he left school without completing a degree. And he spent time working as a farmer, a mill hand, a journalist, and even a school teacher. But during his spare time, he wrote poetry, and he continued to dream of someday being able to support himself through writing alone. Frost did eventually get married and spent 10 years farming in New Hampshire. However, in 1912, he moved to England. He was having difficulty having his poetry published in the United States, so he thought that by moving to England, as many writers were doing during this time, he would maybe be more respected and get some recognition. While he was living in England, he befriended some well-known poets such as Ezra Pound, and he succeeded in publishing 2 collections of poetry, A Boy's Will in 1913 and North of Boston in 1914. He decided to return to the United States in 1915 and was welcomed with a pleasant surprise. He had in fact become famous while living abroad. Knowledge of his poetry and his work had spread to the United States, and he was definitely on the road to becoming one of the most recognized and well-known poets in American literature. He did eventually go on, publish many more volumes of poetry, and received many, many awards. Even though he never completed college, he lectured at dozens and dozens of schools, and continued to farm in Vermont and New Hampshire. In 1960, he became the first poet to read his work at a presidential inauguration, and that was at the invitation of John F. Kennedy. And the poem that he presented at that inauguration is one of the poems that you will be reading this week. The interesting thing about Frost's poetry is that it was popular with both poetry critics and the general public. He used traditional verse forms and conversational language, so people found his poetry to be extremely accessible. You didn't have to be a poetic scholar and have an extremely high vocabulary in order to understand what he was writing about. However, that's not to say that his poetry is simplistic, because it's not in many ways. It, in fact, does have a lot of deeper meanings and multiple levels, which is what allowed you probably to enjoy poems such as Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening or The Road Not Taken in middle school or elementary school, and now be able to look at them again and see an entirely different message. One of the first poem that you're going to be reading this week by Robert Frost is called Birches. I want to give you a little bit of background information on this poem, and then we're going to look at it a little bit together to get you started looking at the poetry of Robert Frost and analyzing his poetry. The speaker in this poem is an old man. Okay, so we are dealing with somebody of age. The old man is recalling the childhood pleasure of swinging from branches, particularly those of birches, which are found throughout New England, where Frost was growing up and living his life. The speaker talks about how exploring his environment prepared him for life's challenges. It gave him a way of being able to deal with what he was doing. However, because of those challenges, adulthood sometimes feels burdensome to him, and it helps to recall these carefree times, especially as a boy swinging from the birches when he still had his whole life ahead of him. I now want to take a look at the poem, so bear with me here while I pull up the next screen. This is a screenshot of your textbook. This is exactly what your textbook will look like. On the left-hand side of the screen, you do see a picture of some birches, probably taken in New England. And I do want you to take some careful time to look at the pictures that the authors chose to include to accompany the poetry, because oftentimes those selections can help you see a little bit into the meaning of the poem. I'm going to start by reading the poem to you, and then we're going to go back and we can talk about it a little bit. When I see birches bend to left and right across the lines of straighter, darker trees, I like to think some boy's been swinging them. But swinging doesn't bend them down to stay as ice storms do. Often you must have seen them loaded with ice a sunny winter morning after a rain. They click upon themselves as the breeze rises and turn many-colored as the stir cracks and crazes their enamel. Soon the sun's warmth makes them shed crystal shells, shattering and avalanching on the snow crust. Such heaps of broken glass to sweep away, you'd think the inner dome of heaven had fallen. They are dragged to the withered bracken by the load, and they seem not to break, though once they are bowed so low for long, they never right themselves. You may see their trunks arching in the woods years afterwards, trailing their leaves on the ground like girls on hands and knees that throw their hair before them over their heads to dry in the sun. But I was going to say, when Truth broke in with all her matter-of-fact about the ice storm, I should prefer to have some boy bend them as he went out and in to fetch the cows. Some boy too far from town to learn baseball, whose only play was what he found himself, summer or winter, and could play alone. One by one he subdued his father's trees by riding them down over and over again until he took the stiffness out of them, and not one but hung limp, not one was left for him to conquer. He learned all there was to learn about not launching out too soon, and so not carrying the tree away clear to the ground. He always kept his poise to the top branches, climbing carefully with the same pains you use to fill a cup up to the brim, and even above the brim. Then he flung outward, feet first, with a swish, kicking his way down through the air to the ground. So was I once myself a swinger of birches, and so I dream of going back to be. It's when I'm weary of considerations, and life is too much like a pathless wood where your face burns and tickles with the cobwebs broken across it, and one eye is weeping from a twig's having slashed across it open. I'd like to get away from earth a while, and then come back to it and begin over. May no fate wilfully misunderstand me, and half grant what I wish and snatch me away not to return. Earth's the right place for love. I don't know where it's likely to go better. I'd like to go by climbing a birch tree, and climb black branches up a snow-white trunk toward heaven, till the tree could bear no more, but dipped its top and set me down again. That would be good, both going and coming back. One could do worse than be a swinger of birches. Let's return to the beginning of the poem. One thing that I hope you notice about this poem is that it sounds very natural. It is written in what we call blank verse. This means that it has a lack of rhyme and an alternating pattern of stressed and unstressed syllables, which makes it sound very much like normal speech. This was a common writing style of Robert Frost. Many of his poems are written this way, and very, very few examples of them rhyme. One of the things I want you to understand about this poem is that it's meant to to represent an old man going back and thinking about his childhood. He is upset that in a way that he has aged and that he can no longer go and swing carefreely from the branches. But at the same time, he acknowledges that he doesn't want to necessarily go back to that time either, because he likes where he is in his current life. And, he'd like to do it for just a minute, but he doesn't want his life to end. He's not ready for those things, for his life to come to an end. In the poem, the whole act of swinging on the birches is presented as a way to escape the rationality or truth of the adult world, because it is such a childhood and childish activity. As the boy climbs up the tree, he is climbing toward what the speaker refers to as heaven, a place where his imagination can be free and he can explore, and he doesn't have to be bogged down by the realities of life. The narrator explains that climbing up the birch is an opportunity to get away from Earth for a while, and then have the opportunity to eventually then come back to it and begin over. But the swinger, or the person climbing the tree, is still grounded in the earth and hasn't really left Earth, because the tree flows down into the roots and into the ground. I think the most important thing for you to understand from this poem is that the freedom of an imagination and what swinging through the birches means to the speaker is appealing and wondrous, but the narrator still cannot avoid returning to truth, reality, and his responsibility is on the ground. He realizes that this escape is only a temporary one. Okay. This is just one of the poems that you are going to read this week, and I would like you to read it again on your own. Make sure that you complete all of the assigned activities that go along with it. You are also going to read Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening, Mending Wall, Out, Out, and Acquainted with the Night, and The Gift Outright. The Gift Outright is the poem that was read at the inauguration of John F. Kennedy, and I think you will find it to be interesting as well. As always, if you have any questions about this week's work, please make sure that you let me know, and I will be more than happy to help you. And have a great week.